Hello and welcome one more time. My name is AlexTheCreative, and in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at how to create a project and a timeline from scratch. If you're new to the DaVinci Resolve API, then this is the video for you. Let's take a look. All right, so what is the DaVinci Resolve API and what are its capabilities? So the DaVinci Resolve API is a way to interact with DaVinci Resolve, but by using code rather than its tools and the interface. So why would you want to use scripting, in this case using Python, although you can also use Lua, but we will be focusing on Python here. So why would you want to do it with code rather than like clicking around in the interface? And the reason, or the primary reason, is for automation. And what that means is that you can actually create scripts on your own that you can run at any time. You can even program those scripts to run at any given time. And that way you don't have to do it over and over again. So you can automate the repetitive parts. The key here is that if you're into video production of any kind, let's say that you are managing your own social media, if you were to create one video, then it doesn't really matter if you're using scripting with the API or if you're using like the tools that are available in the graphical interface. However, we know that you probably won't just do one video, because social media is actually about doing video after video after video for years after years after years. That's when automation takes a particularly important center stage for your video production workflow. So in this particular case, what we're going to be doing here is that we are going to automate the process of creating a project and a timeline, which is the most basic project that you can have. And in creating that script, then we can introduce the whole concept of using the API. What are the things that you need to get started? And at the very least, just get your feet wet in how to go about using scripting inside of video production. Let's get started with the prerequisites that you're going to need on your computer to actually use this. In my case, I'm using a Mac, and pretty much all the things that we'll be talking about today apply also to a PC. All you need to do is figure out a way of running Bash inside of Windows, and then you'll be set to go. All right, let's talk about prerequisites. So if you go to DaVinci Resolve and you go to the help section and under documentation, and there you click on developer, you'll find a folder that actually shows all the different things related to scripting. And there is a README file there that you can take a look at. And you'll see that you need particularly two things. You're going to need a language that allows you to do the scripting. So you can use Lua or you can use Python, and there's two different kinds of Python that you can be using, either 2.7 or 3.6 or more. And I do recommend using Python 3.6 or later in 64-bit rather than the 2.7 one. And then the second thing is that you need to add these dependencies inside of your environment variables. So what are environment variables? So in your system, in your computer, you normally have two files, bash profile or bash RC. And in those files, you set up what we call environment variables, and they set up the environment for the scripting that you do within your Mac. So every time that you open up a terminal window, then those variables are loaded up so that you don't start from scratch. So in the case of the DaVinci Resolve API, you have to add some environment variables to your system so that it communicates with the DaVinci Resolve software in the backend. And you can find them, or you can find exactly what you need to add, those 3 lines, inside of that README file. So if you were to create a project in DaVinci Resolve Studio 19 in a regular way, then as soon as you open up DaVinci Resolve, you'll be presented with a window that looks just like this, with a button that says New Project. And if I was to click that, then they would create a new project. So how do we do this but from the API? So let's jump into Terminal to see how that will work. But before we do that, let's also check on how the interface, the preferences need to be set up so that you can run things from your terminal. All right, so inside of the DaVinci Resolve Studio 19, if I go to my preferences, and I go under my side panel here to General, I'll find that in General Preferences, there's a particular setting for external scripting using. And from here, you have none, local, or network. Of course, if you're in a network connected to various computers, then you're going to select network so that you can run terminal from an SSH connection from a different computer. But if you're not even there yet, if what you're doing is just using a terminal window to run the scripts, then you can just change this to local. After you do that, then you're going to have to restart DaVinci. Once you restart DaVinci, then you can create new scripts and run them directly from your terminal. So let's take a look. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is that I'm going to check to make sure that I have Python installed so that I can run my scripts. To do that, I'm going to type Python 3, and I'm going to do version. And if you run this and you actually get a version of Python that is more than 3.6, then you know that you're ready to run scripts on your Mac. I have prepared a simple script that is going to teach us how to go about the first item, which is creating a project. So let's take a look at that one. So this is the script that I have, and first I am declaring what we call a shebang, which is the executable that is going to run this script. In my case, it's going to be Python 3. Then we're going to import my DaVinci Resolve script library, and I'm going to give it a name of DVR script. Then I am going to call that DVR script with a method script app and the name resolve. And I'm going to assign this to an object that I'm going to call resolve. Then I'm going to take that object resolve, and then I'm going to call another method called get project manager. So this is how I get the project manager. And I'm going to assign it to an object that I'm going to call project manager. And then I am going to ask the user with input to give me a name for the project that I'm going to be creating, and I'm going to assign it to a variable called pname. And then finally, I'm going to, with the project manager object, I'm going to create a final method. In this case, it's called create project, and I'm going to pass the attribute of the project name that the user gave in this line. In other words, I'm just going to ask what is the name of the project, and then I'm going to use that name to create a new project. Let's call this project PR1. All right, so if we head to DaVinci Resolve, we'll see that now we have a new project called PR1. Let's do another one just for good measure. So let's go ahead and run it again. And this time, let's call it PR2. And you can do this over and over again, and you can programmatically call your script creating new projects. And this is obviously the most basic of scripts that you can run, but of course you can even duplicate projects. And the use of that is that you can create your own templates. And so if you're, for example, managing social media and you add branding, logos, fonts, effects, LUTs, color grading, and so on, and you have a particular project that you use that you've added all those things to it, then you can just duplicate that project and use it as a template rather than having to start from scratch every single time. So the second thing that we wanted to look at today was to create a timeline. In this case, we're going to just do an empty timeline. So let's take a look at that. What I need to do to create an empty timeline is to call the appropriate method to create a timeline. But I don't necessarily know by heart the documentation to know the names of each one of the methods. And if you take a look at the official documentation inside of DaVinci Resolve, you will see that it's a very dry document. It's very difficult to read. And so I created a cheat sheet that is available for purchase inside of AlexTheCreative that allows us to just do this a lot easier. So let's go to that cheat sheet to take a look at what is the name of the method that we need for this part. So I'm here in the DaVinci Resolve cheat sheet, and I am going to just type what I remember, in this case, just timeline. And as you can see, a site type immediately starts filtering all of the different methods inside of the groups that are available. And this applies to all of the API methods in DaVinci Resolve 19. So as you can see, create empty timeline is inside of the object media pool. And I have all sorts of other objects that, of course, you can use for scripting yourself. So let's take a look at create empty timeline. Name adds the new timeline with the given name. So this is exactly what I need. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to use it in my script. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to be calling the media pool object with an object with a method called create empty timeline with a particular name. So let's ask for that name. So tname equals input, and then please provide a name for the timeline. Cool. Tname. And then timeline. All right, so before we continue though, we don't have the media pool object. And so we need to actually get the media pool object. So media pool is going to get media pool project.get media pool. So again, I'm using one of the products inside of AlexTheCreative, which is like the suggestion inside of Sublime Text. But I could also do the same thing with the cheat sheet. So just go to get media pool. So once more, get media pool. And you can see that is inside of the project object. So if I click on that, it would be project get media pool. And that's exactly what we have here, project.get media pool. And since I named my object exactly project, then I don't even have to change that. All right, so we got the media pool, and then we're going to call the media pool that is going to assign the timeline. So let's go ahead and run this one more time to see what we get. Insert the name for this project. Let's call it PR3. And that should create the project. And then it's asking for a timeline. Let's call it timeline 1. Let's take a look. All right, so as you can see, we're in project or PR3, and then inside we have timeline 1. Let's call this one more time just to see it working behind here. So one more time, insert the name for a project. Let's call it PR4. and let's give it a timeline called TR1. All right, so we were successful in creating a new project called PR4 and a timeline that is empty called TR1. So what we did in this tutorial was to take a look at just the basics of using the DaVinci Resolve API. It's a very simple process. It doesn't have to be complex. And I know that if you're a video editor, then it may feel like it's overwhelming at first, but it's super simple. Like Python is a very, very easy to learn language, and you can do it on your own pace. You don't have to be a coder by night, or overnight. So this is the beginning of a journey that, of course, can get very, very complex, where you have templates, where you have scripts that do all sorts of things, and that's the exciting part of that. So here, what we covered was how to create a very simple project and then create a timeline as well. So now you know how to do those two things. Thank you for watching our tutorial on using the DaVinci Resolve API. We hope that you found it informative and helpful. And if so, please consider subscribing or liking or commenting below. We try to look at all the comments and respond if possible. So hopefully take a moment to comment below, good or bad. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.